Welcome to Season 2 of Nutanix Weekly, hosted by XenTegra. I'm Philip Sellers, CTO here at XenTegra, and we're kicking off things in a new way. This episode is a special one. For the first time, we brought Nutanix Weekly live, recording it right after Nutanix.Next. So instead of our usual format, you're about to step directly into a live conversation. We'll be breaking down the biggest announcements from .Next, what they actually mean to your environment, and most importantly, what to do next. If you've ever left a big event wondering how it applies to your business, this is that conversation. All right, let's jump into the live session.
Hello and welcome to a live episode of Nutanix Weekly. And this is our recap episode. And I want to say thanks for joining us, and really am looking forward to talking with my team members and taking questions live from all of our listeners, and working our way through all of the announcements that we have had at Nutanix.Next just a couple of weeks ago in Chicago. So today I can't do this alone, so I'm going to bring along two of my solutions architects here at XenTegra. So I'd like to say welcome to Andy Green and welcome to Chris Calhoun. They're going to be joining me for this great conversation. You know, we've had a lot of things announced. There's a PDF that we're going to bring up, and we're going to talk kind of about that recaps all the different announcements that came out during .next. So looking at that, there's so many different announcements. I'm curious, as you guys kind of start thinking back about Next, what stands out for you in terms of news or announcements that came out from the event this year?
I'll start. I was really excited to see the announcement around the NetApp partnership and a lot of new tools just around AI development. So I think that both of those were exciting to see.
Choice with Nutanix. It always started out that way, and it always has been, and it's continuing to grow. To me, it's an ecosystem now of, it's a supported platform, but it's extending to, in this case, external storage. The AI growth model is fantastic. You can see other players, big names in the market, contributing to the partnership with Nutanix. And I think it just shows the overall value that businesses, customers alike are seeing with the Nutanix platform.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised to hear you mention AI, Andy, because it was a big part of the event, and that's a big part of where we're going as an industry. You know, generative AI has changed the landscape a lot, and there's a lot of data sets that just don't work in public cloud or public locations. So as you were listening to the agentic AI story and what's coming from Nutanix, I guess kind of what's your key takeaways around NAI and the whole idea of AI factories?
Agentic AI, it really represents that shift towards more autonomous AI agents, tools that can execute complex enterprise workflows in more of an autonomous manner. What I saw was there was really a new catalog of AI services aimed at accelerating the work of those AI developers. So all of the tools that you need to be able to build those agentic AI tools and have those up and running in your environment are all built into the platform. And I felt like it really resolves a lot of the concerns that some of our clients may be facing around spend, around security, and around just governance, keeping that data secure and in an on-prem platform, as opposed to potentially releasing it out into the world.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that stuck out to me was the potential for shadow AI. We talked about shadow IT in the industry. It's easy to go out and swipe a credit card, and then you're suddenly enabled with an application running in SaaS platform, and your corporate IT knows nothing about that. AI's got a lot of the same sorts of risk in terms of, having data that's not secure, that's not governed the way that the rest of the IT estate is. That I think was my key takeaway for agentic AI, but I was really intrigued too that we've got a solution with Nutanix that scales up and solves performance problems as well. Data is a big component. You've got to get data close. You've got to get the data next to the AI. And Nutanix Unified Storage is another great example of that moving forward. Sometime last year, there was a benchmark, and Nutanix Unified Storage outperformed Weka and other purpose-built file systems in performance tests around AI and ML workloads. That, I think, is also another huge advantage of the platform when it comes to high-speed data engines that power all of the interesting data behind the AI.
Yeah, for sure. Because to me, the need and the demand for persistent storage is all triggered by this new AI workload. You know, there can't be any latency, there can't be any delays. The back and forth communication has to be efficient. And I think that that's where the Nutanix platform and the unified storage as the underpinning for this new AI workload is really helpful in that traffic communication back and forth.
Yeah, I think as we delve deeper into the AI story where Nutanix is concerned, there's also partnership announcements that came out both with NVIDIA and with AMD around co-development with their platforms. We met the NVIDIA Rubin platform as part of the agentic AI story. That new strategic alliance is really, well, it's not new, I guess. That strategic alliance is really paying lots of dividends. That's the core underpinning behind Nutanix Enterprise AI. But, the Rubin platform is really around accelerating time to value. Any thoughts about the NVIDIA partnership or the new AMD partnership that was announced?
I'll jump in here because to me, this even goes back to earlier announcements from even years past. To me, the idea here is, hey, Nutanix is partnering with somebody that is an accelerator in the market. NVIDIA's always been a leader, and that to me is part of the path forward for Nutanix. They are partnering with those that are pushing the envelope, that are innovating. Of course, NVIDIA being one of the named partners, Hugging Face was an announcement in the past. I remember presenting to customers basically this time a couple years ago with the same type message of, look, they're early in the partnership. They see the value of the platform and they're continuing that partnership. So I think it's only getting stronger and growing as the two, I'll say giants, because I feel like NVIDIA is that in the AI market. So that just shows the value from both perspectives and both businesses to collectively work together.
I think the NVIDIA announcement is exciting, just better integration with their agent toolkits. But AMD, to me, is interesting because I always feel like freedom of choice is a really good thing in this type of market. I actually think that, competition makes us all better. So I've said that for years about Nutanix and its competitors. And I think that, it strengthens everyone if we have some good competition. And that freedom of choice has always been a big factor for the Nutanix platforms. Overall, I think these are just really two great announcements aimed at giving our clients more freedom of choice.
Yeah, I agree. The AMD is interesting to me. It's a large investment into Nutanix as a company, but also that joint engineering initiative. One of the things that I took away from hearing at the event was just how we can shift things from purpose-built hardware, GPUs, and the future may also include inference on regular CPUs and some of those features that we typically think of as the GPU now moving towards commodity CPU. And I think that's a big part of where we go. We talk about power and availability of hardware. There's a lot of challenges. And so shifting those workloads where maybe it makes sense is another enterprise choice I think we're all going to be faced with, at least during the supply chain sort of issues that we have going on today. As we think about kind of the other announcements, partnership is what you called out, Andy, and partnership is a big part of what we heard throughout the week. We've talked about external storage in the past, and so this conference season was no different. We had new announcements, but we also have several GA platforms that are already out. We have Dell PowerFlex, we have Pure or EverPure Array, and we also have Dell PowerStore coming. That was a new announcement. And we've also got a brand new partnership. Chris, who's up next?
One of the biggest announcements was NetApp. I think that was really the highlight of some of our small to medium sized customers that have that invested interest in NetApp, from a filer, from back-end 3-tier approach, from their days working with VMware and a full 3-tier stack. And I think that now this gives those same customers a way to bridge the gap, but yet still recognize that investment in their NetApp. We've got a customer who recently invested in NetApp and said, hey, look, I'd love to hear if Nutanix has got an offering. And this was right before the conference. And we said, stay tuned. I think that that's really key, because Nutanix is listening, and I think that that's really the key aspect here is they didn't stop with just a few announcements around external storage. They're trying to pave the way forward and have a consistent modeling of, we started with the Dell PowerFlex, we started with the EverPure, but let's continue down this path. And I think that that's really where you see Nutanix leaning in and listening to customers wanting those options of external storage.
Yeah, and the external storage story isn't just choice. It's also protection of your investment. Like you pointed out, there's a lot of money that's been spent on these solutions. And so we really want to make sure that we're cognizant of that investment cycle and our clients' dollars. We want to make sure that we're getting and bringing the most value to the table. And this is another great way. We're enabling more hardware reuse and expanded HCL of all the different compute nodes that can now be used with external storage, and expanding HCL for all of the existing hardware to be recertified for hyperconverged as well. That's increasingly part of the choice story that we're hearing from Nutanix, is that they're also allowing much more reuse of hardware. And that's at a great time because, as I mentioned before, supply chain is a real problem for us across the industry. RAM and solid state, NVMe, all of those components are constrained. We've been through GPU constraints in the past. We've seen ASICs and switching and things like that constrained. So I think the expectation as a client and as an advisor to our clients, we have to think about what happens when we have a supply chain interruption. With the announcements around hardware reuse, it's always been part of the Nutanix story to have choice in your vendors. What did we hear from our favorite OEMs during the show?
Well, one of the additions to what Chris just mentioned was, in addition to NetApp, we also are going to see support for Lenovo storage running ONTAP.
So Lenovo works closely with NetApp, uses the ONTAP operating system that's also in the NetApp arrays. That's an amazing, but also logical sort of leap for the company. We also heard, an announcement of a long-standing sort of holdout when it came to AHV compatibility from our friends at Cisco. Chris, what did we learn from Cisco?
Yeah, this is something that's been near and dear in my past days with Nutanix. Is and this is an adjacent to that, but basically the Cisco ecosystem as a whole has not been supported by AHV in the past. And I know that there was an earlier announcement for Cisco Call Manager. Obviously, unified communications to me is a common thread that a lot of my past customers really had a reliance on from a platform perspective. And that was one of the decision-making factors was, hey, it's got to support our Cisco framework around our phone system, the whole unified calling or unified messaging just as a whole. And then it started out with an announcement around Cisco ICE. I remember a customer that was looking for compatibility for AHV in the past, and that was a relief to the customer to know that was recently adopted and announced approved AHV compatibility. So they've paved the way forward for that. And now with the call manager announcement and just the unified communications as a whole, that's now unlocking a lot of flexibility and freedom for not having to have that dedicated VMware cluster reserved on the side while you moved all your other workloads. Now you can have a unified platform all running AHV. I think that that's really is where the benefit to the Nutanix platform lies.
I agree with that. AHV on any compute was also announced. And so we talk about the reuse factor. That's a huge one. It enables the external storage story, but AHV anywhere is a really targeted response to what's going on with VMware and Broadcom. As droves of customers are looking for alternatives and exploring what's on the market, this is a really, really helpful thing for customers who are searching for that exit path. We talk about AHV, but that's not the only bare metal that we have from the Nutanix portfolio. We have a new support now that was announced during .next for bare metal within KP. Andy, I'm curious about your thoughts on an alternative to AHV at the root. What's that about? Where is that going?
I think it just opens doors, right? Anytime we have a hypervisor, there's a little bit of additional overhead associated with that, but it also gives us that workload isolation from the tenant as well. So we're going to see that strong tenant workload isolation, and I think too some simplified day two operations.
At the end of the day, also choice, right? For companies that have gone all in on Kubernetes and maybe they don't need the hypervisor, this gives them that alternative at scale. It also fits with the strategy that Nutanix has been refactoring their applications to run on Kubernetes natively. We've seen Nutanix Files as part of cloud native AOS, but we've also seen other things, we've heard other things like refactoring of NCM so that it runs as containers. So the container world continues to develop, and I think I would argue that mainstream mid-market's not there yet, but we are starting to see our first generation of applications that are coming natively as containerized or Kubernetes orchestrated containers. So I think that's something every practitioner should be learning something about or looking into, because it seems like the mass of the market and developed software is now moving that direction.
Yeah, Philip, to me, think about this in instances where you've got large manufacturing or edge locations that running a hypervisor, like Andy mentioned, is just extra resources on top. If they've got to run at scale and they've got 1,000 locations, then the focus has to be on what's the most efficient way we can run our required software at our edge locations with the minimum footprint. And that's where that NKP on metal and having the choice of the various OEM options really makes sense. Optimizing your workload for those remote locations. Just wanted to add that to Andy's point.
Also saw the announcement of Foundation Central on NKP. So another example of Nutanix really leaning into that containerized workload and using their own tools, using NKP for that.
And that's not the end of the announcements. I mean, as much as we talked about AI, we learned and see new features in terms of NKP. One of those intersections is around flow networking and containers. That's a great intersection because network security and what flow brings to the table is necessary. And when we've grown accustomed to being able to put granular security policies within our VM environment, it almost feels like a step back to lose that in a containerized environment. Now you don't have to compromise.
Yeah, for sure. Because to me, the efficiency of enabling flow through just, hey, one click flow's enabled, and then it's almost a point and click management setup of the tagging capabilities to block east-west firewalling of, in the past, virtual machine communication. That's extended now into the exact same world of containerized communication. And I think that that's where the foundation of the platform goes back to simplicity and now extending that to the containerized world, because there's obviously a technical advantage of security at those edge locations I just talked about, so that you don't have the ransomware wide open footprints at your remote locations. And if there are opportunities for ransomware, at least it's isolated. If you can lock down ports, IP addressing, all of the simplicity of the flow security, then you really do reduce your footprint. So I think that that's something that to me should be part of just the general deployment Andy mentioned Foundation Central. That's the centralized deployment of, in the past, it's been Nutanix clusters. Now it can be NKP from that centralized location to those edge locations. Well, part of that needs to include the security footprint, because that's number one for Nutanix. It's not an afterthought. It's a built-in part of the overall security platform. So not only choice, as we've talked about, but the required security that we need in the year 20. You definitely don't want to show up on any type of ransomware top 10 list or in the news from a business perspective. So if Nutanix got a solution with security focused and easily implementation, or an easy implementation from day one, let's utilize that. And that's where, again, the native cloud tooling around the Kubernetes and extending the platform from flow security from VM perspective to now even the containerized solution makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it makes a cohesive story because, again, simplification was one of the key goals here, making it so that you don't need siloed teams. We've called Nutanix silo busters from the beginning because they've unified the way that teams work together, making it easier to do maintenance and upgrades and everyday activities. Now they're bringing that to bare metal with NKP metal, ability to run that on bare metal. Their new Nutanix Kubernetes platform, extending that with services to cloud native AOS, things like Nutanix files and objects running on Kubernetes on bare metal. It turns into a completely holistic story. Again, simplifying the way that you manage it, keeping things consistent, and making sure that it's easy. It's the easy button at the end of the day.
Sure.
I'm curious at this point if any of our listeners want to put something in the chat and ask or call out what they heard from the event. We can talk about those. But I'm going to turn the tables on you, Andy and Chris. What other announcement would you say kind of piqued your interest?
I'll start. I think we touched on NetApp. We touched on the Cisco partnership for unified communications earlier. One thing that I found was interesting there is FlexPod. When you tie together Nutanix, Cisco, and NetApp, now you have a Nutanix-powered FlexPod stack. And that to me was just an interesting insight when I realized that was now possible with Nutanix.
And I'd like to add, too, to me, the Azure virtual desktops running locally on Nutanix AHV is obviously a fantastic announcement that in the past, obviously that would push workloads to public cloud automatically in order to run those virtualized desktops, because customers are looking for ways. Obviously, XenTegra in the past is a strong Citrix partner. Customers are still looking for the freedom of choice around that even. Well, if they know that there's choice, but it has to be public cloud, then that pushes them that direction no matter what. But with the announcement of AVD running in a Nutanix on-prem cluster, it's a perfect platform for those virtual desktops. So I think that's something to look forward to.
Well, we've got one that came up in the public chat. Shout out to Mike Fantazzi. Mike, work with him on some accounts. He's a Nutanix SE, but he called out zero copy migrations with both Pure and NetApp. And those are really cool because the underlying storage array has the data, and all you really have to do to make this migration possible in the storage array is update pointers, and voila, you have VDISks that are now compatible with AHV. So this is a great place where that co-engineering between external storage and Nutanix is going to really help accelerate migrations for existing customers and help them to get more value with their external storage arrays. Appreciate you calling that out, Mike. In terms of the things I saw, I would say I'm pretty excited around some of the service provider announcements. And so, for a client, what does that actually mean? It means that you're going to lower the cost of Nutanix-powered infrastructure. So as a customer who may be working with XenTegra or another service provider, if you're buying your services, by the VM, doing infrastructure as a service. Service Provider Central is giving us a bunch of new features to really bring down the cost of management. So the tangible benefit for customers is that they're going to get infrastructure at a much cheaper rate from service providers like us. And so that's another way of enabling choice. We talk about all the different destinations that you can run Nutanix and AOS. Let's just kind of go through some of those. I mentioned one, that's our XenTegra cloud. We host 100% on Nutanix, but what about the public clouds? Andy, what's the first public cloud you can think of that Nutanix was compatible with?
AWS.
And so we got new announcements there from AWS around GovCloud and European Sovereign Cloud. An increasing sort of demand from the European market is compliance with things like GDPR, making sure that their data stays in country. So AWS is responding to those needs.
And there's always,
Chris, what's the next one?
For AWS, there's always good hardware models too. To me, that gives customers even more freedom of choice of having the flexibility of either small workloads or large workloads. They're capable of running in AWS for sure. So I definitely think that makes sense.
What's the next cloud, guys?
So we've got obviously Azure. So Azure being the next one in line. To me, the difference is we've had customers looking at both. We have customers running in both. Obviously, from a technical perspective, AWS being the first, Nutanix utilizes the AWS network natively. And some of the AWS tooling that runs in AWS is actually seamlessly connected with the Nutanix clusters. You can utilize both. Azure, just a little bit different. You've got to use your flow networking components with Azure. And I think that there isn't a difference there, but also there's an advantage there. Because to me, with Flow network security as a whole and Flow virtual networking, you get to, and it's an honor to get to an easier point and click interface for networking. Networking is sometimes tough. And I know that in the past, I've had customers set up POCs, and the biggest part was getting the network components to communicate correctly. So with that and with the experience Nutanix has, we're able to bridge those gaps from the Azure public cloud to, hosting Nutanix cloud clusters and even communicating back to on-prem Nutanix environments. So I think that that's a good path forward. Philip, I'll mention this too. You said earlier, we've got supply chain issues. Guess what? Public cloud is a good landing spot for some of those. If customers are already utilizing cloud spend and are committed to that, then go forward and look at extending your Nutanix cluster to the public cloud. Of course, we would love to host you in XenTegra cloud, and it would probably be cheaper, but you obviously have options or choices from a Nutanix perspective.
One of those advantages could be a stopgap measure, a short-term commitment or pay by the month kind of thing while you're waiting on your hardware. So that's one of the things that the Nutanix team stressed to us is the public cloud has available hardware if we're having issues with supply chain.
And just to add to what Chris said, I think there was an announcement around elastic SAN with Azure. So cloud native storage, very similar to a SAN that you might have on-prem, very high performance for those workloads that need a high performance SAN.
For sure. And as I mentioned just a little bit ago, to me, one of the excitement announcements was around AVD, having that offering available as an option to customers looking for hosting virtual desktops and not wanting to fully commit, because think about it, a lot of the workloads that customers are still utilizing may still run on-prem. So if you throw your virtual desktops in public cloud, but yet all of those customers still need to interact with your data that's on-prem, then does it efficiently make sense to have those public hosted workstations? So Nutanix offers AVD on-prem. So I think it makes sense as a viable solution for the desktop fleet.
And that's a great call out because... Go ahead.
Sorry. No, well, I was just going to mention, the secondhand information, but I think this works by installing that Arc server on Nutanix. And, I think that could be interesting because I'm thinking about the doors it could open for the future. So we'll have to see what comes. But I thought that was one of the more, as far as announcements, I thought that one had a lot of potential.
Yeah, I agree. our heritage is that EUC space here at XenTegra. And so one of our core partners is Nerdio, especially in the AVD space. And so Nerdio and Microsoft had this joint announcement where Nerdio can also be used to manage AVD on the Nutanix infrastructure. And so I think it's a play that sort of builds out total choice for clients looking for destinations or locations. AVD is great. It's a very consumable, scalable sort of virtual desktop package, but sometimes you need those desktops to be next to your core applications and data. That data gravity comes into play. So this gives customers who maybe couldn't go towards AVD in the past because of that data gravity, this gives them a new choice to put those desktops right next to it. Try to think what else we've got. There's so many announcements on partnerships. We got one in the security space as well. And that was a integration between Palo Alto and Nutanix Enterprise AI. This was an interesting one to me because in the security space, the AI could feel like an afterthought, right? We've got a lot of work and development going into making things actually proof of concept or minimally viable. But Palo Alto's working with Nutanix around model scanning and red teaming. And so I think that's great from a security aspect that, sometimes developers are just trying to get things out the door and we have a mandate to keep things secure. And so that's that natural friction between the two sides of the pond, I guess, fence, river, sure, the two sides. So having security as something built in is, again, something absolutely necessary. As we kind of look over the last announcements, we should talk about Omnissa as well. That is an announcement that came from the former VMware division. So Omnissa is now the EUC, or was formerly the EUC division of VMware, now an independent company. And they announced last year that they were going to be supporting Nutanix AHV. We got the GA of that this year. And so, as an EUC company, that's another great partner of ours. It gives choice. Now, Omnissa customers using Horizon aren't necessarily bound and tied to VMware. What are your thoughts, I guess, as we talk about that from an EUC perspective?
This one really surprised me when it was announced. And, Horizon's been around forever, and it's a great VDI provider. I just always thought of it as being so tied into vCenter with its integrations that I never thought about it running anywhere outside of that VMware landscape. So when I heard the announcement, I was excited about it. I think, there are a lot of legacy VMware clients who started with Horizon, who are very happy with the Horizon platform, but maybe would be interested in moving to a different hypervisor if they had the choice. And this just opens those doors for them. So personally, I was surprised to hear about it a year ago, but I think this is one of the better announcements that we've seen lately.
Yeah, for sure. I agree, Andy, because to me, wasn't it last year that they originally announced the Omnissa, I'll say GA or not GA, but basically announcement, early access. And I think that now with a follow-up this year at the .next conference that it's GA, that definitely gives the folks the opportunity to look at alternatives and it's always one of those where in the past as a customer-minded focus, we always had the option of having those OEMs of choice. Some workstations run Dell, some HP, some Lenovo, and depending on pricing, you had your options. Well, similar now in 2026, the more that Nutanix offers up freedom of choice, that gives those legacy customers more choice of, instead of just sticking around and paying whatever the asked price is for renewals, they really do have a choice for moving their workload. Staying with Omnissa, past Horizon customers, totally makes sense. And now they've got the different platform, a strong Nutanix validated platform to run on.
Well, and you said something really key right there. There's a brand new program within Nutanix when it comes to partnerships and particularly service providers. And we met for the first time, powered by Nutanix. That's the name of the program. And the first instance of this are verified solutions. So a number of different service providers, including XenTegra, were part of that initial class. We've got a DR as a service that is a verified solution. And we're also the first in the world to have a desktop as a service based on Citrix that is a verified solution with Nutanix. What do those two verification mean for our customers and for customers in general when they're looking for a service provider?
I'll jump in and say XenTegra is awesome. That's what it means. But seriously, we pride ourselves on providing fantastic solutions. And if you go back to early days of Nutanix, a lot of customers will say 10 years ago thought that Nutanix was the storage solution for VDI workloads, for Citrix workloads. It was purpose built, in air quotes. Obviously, we know that it's not exclusive to just that, but I remember the story of customers saying, oh, I thought that was Nutanix was the storage that we use for Citrix. Well, absolutely. The answer is yes, it is. Not exclusive or required for that. But in this case, it's obviously a great solution for all workloads. But specifically, the validation part to me is, hey, again, best in breed Citrix virtual desktop infrastructure running on Nutanix validated platform really tells you that, hey, Mr. Customer, if you want the top, not only performing, but also from a solution as a whole operating model, then Desktop as a Service Award, here's XenTegra, here's Citrix on Nutanix, the best of everything.
Yeah.
To me,
it was just largely validating what we've been telling our clients for a long time, right? Being a Nutanix service provider isn't new for XenTegra. We've been a fully Nutanix shop in our data centers for 5 years now, Philip? Is that about right?
Probably 6, yeah, going on 7 at this point.
So we've had nothing but Nutanix in our data center for 6+ years. We've been doing this for a long time, but this confirms that that our services have been reviewed against Nutanix's best practices. It's that trust, that validation to the client that the underlying infrastructure is going to be reliable, that we can scale to meet their needs, and that we are aligned to those proven designs that Nutanix has validated for us.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to kind of wrap, right? Like, we run our business on this platform. We use it every day, both for our customers and ourselves. With all of the new announcements we talked about, what hasn't changed is the same great foundation. It's a great foundation to run your VDI. It's a great foundation to run your virtual workloads, your databases, your traditional VMs. And so with so many people in the market looking for alternatives and looking for something that's going to carry them into the future and drive innovation, this is a platform you can invest in. All of the great announcements we've talked about today show the possible, where you can go with the platform, what you can do in the future. We also have that foundation that Nutanix has been doing for 15 years of building great scalable infrastructure that's simple to operate, gives the client choice, and scales and performs with resiliency. There's not another alternative to the other guys on the market that is as full-featured and capable as what Nutanix has on the market. And I think that's the underlying thing when you're trying to chart a digital transformation and do something strategic in your organization. This is the platform that can drive that forward for you and keep it secure. The current landscape, we see a lot of things changing in security. AI-enabled security vulnerabilities, scans, scares like the new Claude. I'm blanking on the model name now, but the new Claude security vulnerability model.
OpenClaw is
Mythos. Mythos is
specifically
the one. This is an interesting thing because it goes out and it finds vulnerabilities and can help exploit them. Had a really interesting conversation on the plane last week, and I was talking with a security professional. Her take on this is that we've invested a lot in discovering the CVEs, the vulnerabilities, documenting them, but we haven't spent the money on engineering fixes. We haven't spent the money developing ways to mitigate those risks using AI. And I think that's a but somewhere we should be going. Mythos can find them. And so that's an interesting sort of dynamic we're finding ourselves in. So having a secure infrastructure to tie that back is a criticality. And like Chris said earlier, that's not an afterthought. It's baked into the product. And I think that's even more of an important thing for companies to think about: their security posture, the number of attacks, the additional tools. All of these things are kind of mounting against us. So guys, as we're kind of wrapping up today, are there any other thoughts around announcements, things to call out?
I think a great summary is expansion and choice is always the key factors and key items whenever you think of Nutanix these days, of the offerings available. They're listening to what customers want and need and meeting customers where they are. That's their freedom of choice. Philip, one of the last things that you've always said was Nutanix makes things easy. And that's to me, the foundational from a technical perspective is allowing generalists and businesses to run their platforms and their required workloads in a way that you don't have to rely on that one engineer. You can have a group of generalists and allow them to actually multitask so that you can extend that business model to not just keeping the lights on, but innovation, being first to the market. Nutanix is that platform to help you get to the market faster. And I think that that's really some of the key underlying aspects from not only a technical model, but the business-minded approach that Nutanix has these days. So that's really what I take from this year's conference.
Yeah, I had a really good time. I've said this before, but this is the conference that I look forward to every year. So to me, .next 2026 from Chicago really showcased how Nutanix was redefining hybrid multi-cloud, bringing a lot of new tools around enterprise AI, and really kind of proving that the future of infrastructure it's simpler, it's smarter, and it's built to run on anything and really anywhere.
And in that same vein, Andy, for me, the highlight was the people. I stayed in conversation from the time I walked in the doors to the time I left the halls. And actually, it became a running joke between Claire, our marketing director, and me. How many feet can we go before someone else, you see and stop and talk to them? So,
yep, that's
the
what
community.
Andy and I said on day one.
Yeah,
four steps this time. Let's see what next time gives us. But yeah, we talked about it on day one.
But that's the thing, right? The baton has been passed in the technology industry. The baton has been passed from an infrastructure perspective. And it's so great to see so many of the people in the community, people that I've worked with in the past customers, people that moved between organizations. And for me, it's the people at the end of the day. I had a ton of great conversations with clients and vendor partners. That to me is one of the highlights of going to an event like this. I get a lot of value in the hallways. I get value in the show floor, and I get value in the sessions. But at the end of the day, it's the people that make it the best. So guys, I really do want to thank you for your thoughts and opinions about what we saw, what we heard during the conference. As we're wrapping up today's session, I would just say Mike Fantazzi put a public chat out here. The keynotes are available on demand. So you can go out to nutanix.com/next/on-demand. And those would be great listening. You'll get to hear everything that we talked about directly from the folks who announced it. And then there's deep dives available. And of course, I know every SE in the Nutanix world would absolutely love to talk with you about what is new and what is available from a Nutanix platform. Also, as we're wrapping up today, we've got a great giveaway. Nutanix and XenTegra are partnered, and so we're actually giving away a MetaQuest headset. So one lucky winner is going to get an email by the end of day, and we'll announce that by email. And for the first 20 people that take a request or take a meeting with us and want to learn more, you'll get a $100 Uber Eats gift card. That's for us to say thank you and reward you for joining us today. And we'll announce those winners as well and notify you by email. So the meeting link is in the chat. It's also available for you to click here. But let's talk more. If you heard something interesting or something that could potentially help you, whether that's external storage support, reuse of your existing hardware, or anything else, we'd love to have a conversation with you. So use that meeting link, get a reward, and we look forward to talking with you.